That is not your food. Those 5 words, said to me in my own kitchen, by my daughter-in-law. Said like I was a stranger who had wandered in off the street. Said while I was standing in front of the refrigerator I had bought, in the house that had my name on the deed, reaching for a container of leftovers that I had paid for and cooked myself 3 days earlier. I didn't move right away. I stood there with my hand still on the refrigerator handle, cold air drifting out, and I thought, did I just hear that correctly? My son was sitting at the kitchen table. He didn't look up from his phone. That was the moment everything changed, though I didn't fully understand it yet. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. My name is not important. What matters is that I am 64 years old. I spent 31 years teaching middle school English in the same district, and I raised my son Arthur mostly on my own after his father left when Arthur was 11. I worked every year of those 31 years. I packed lunches and drove carpool and went to every single one of his baseball games, even the ones that ran until 9 at night in October when it was 40 degrees and there were maybe 12 people in the stands. I did all of it, and I was proud of it. When Arthur was in his late 20s, he met Tessa. She was from a different city, had a sharp way of speaking that some people found charming, and I found, from the very first dinner, slightly unsettling. Not unkind, exactly. Just precise, in a way that felt less like confidence and more like she was always keeping score. But Arthur loved her, and I loved Arthur. So I welcomed her. They married 4 years ago. I helped pay for the wedding. Not all of it, but a portion, about $6,000, because Arthur asked and I wanted to give them a good start. They moved into an apartment in the city, both working, both doing fine as far as I could tell. I, meanwhile, had my house, a 3-bedroom in a quiet suburb, nothing grand but mine. I'd paid it off 2 years before I retired. I'd a pension from the school district, not lavish, but enough, around $20 a month. I had a savings account with about $47,000 in it, money I had been careful with for years, mostly for emergencies and, honestly, for whatever came next. I also had a small IRA I didn't touch. My life was modest and it was good. I had my garden. I had my neighbor, Helen, who had been my friend for 20 years and who came over on Tuesday evenings to watch whatever we felt like and eat whatever was in the house. I had my cat, a gray tabby named Suit, who slept at the foot of my bed every night. I did not feel lonely, but I would be lying if I said I didn't sometimes walk past Arthur's old bedroom and feel something quiet and heavy in my chest. That is probably why when he called me in March of last year, I said yes so quickly. "Mom," he said, "things at work have gotten really bad." He was a project manager at a construction firm. I knew the industry had been rough. I'd seen the news. They laid off half the department, he said, including me. I told him I was sorry. I meant it. We've been trying to hold on to the apartment, but the rent is it's not possible anymore. Not with Tessa's hours getting cut too. There was a pause. I knew what was coming, and I found that I was already opening my mouth to offer it before he even asked. "We were wondering," he said carefully, "if maybe we could come stay with you. Just until I find something. I don't want to ask, Mom. I know it's your space, but we don't really have anywhere else." "Of course," I said. "This is your home. It will always be your home." I meant that too. I meant every word of it. They moved in on a Saturday. Arthur made 3 trips with the truck. Tessa directed where things should go. She had a lot of things. Nice things. Better furniture than mine. Actually, heavier and more expensive looking. Some of it ended up in Arthur's old room, which they were using as their bedroom. Some of it ended up in the living room, replacing pieces of mine that got quietly moved to the garage. I didn't say anything about that. I told myself it didn't matter. The first 2 weeks were fine. A little crowded, a little loud, but fine. Tessa cooked occasionally and the food was good. Arthur seemed relieved to be out of the city. We had coffee together in the mornings. I thought, this is going to be all right. Then, gradually, it wasn't. It started with small things. Tessa rearranging the pantry and putting my items in the back, hers in the front. Tessa asking me not to use the washing machine on certain days because she had a schedule. Tessa mentioning once that my Tuesday evenings with Helen were a little disruptive. We're usually trying to wind down by 8 and the talking carries. I shortened the visits with Helen. I did the laundry on the days I was told. I moved my things to the back of the pantry and didn't say a word. but then it escalated. One evening, about 6 weeks after they moved in, I came home from a walk to find that Tessa had reorganized the living room significantly. The armchair I had sat in for 15 years, the one I bought the year I paid off the mortgage, as a little gift to myself, was gone. In its place was a large sectional sofa, part of what they'd brought from the apartment. I found my armchair in the garage, next to a bag of old Halloween decorations. I asked Arthur about it that night, quietly, just the two of us. "She just thought it flowed better," he said. "You know how she is about that stuff. That chair has been in that room for 15 years, Arthur. It's just a chair, Mom." And then, softer, in a voice that was meant to be soothing but landed like a door closing, "We're all trying to make this work." I went to bed that night feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: unwelcome. In my own house. The food incident happened 3 weeks later. I had done the grocery shopping that day, a full run, about $190, because the refrigerator was nearly empty and I wanted to make a pot roast for the weekend. I came home, unpacked everything, and put it all away. That evening, Tessa's sister came to visit with her husband and 2 kids. I hadn't been told they were coming. When I came downstairs around 6 o'clock, the kitchen was full of people I barely knew, and Tessa was pulling out ingredients and pots and generally moving through the space as if she lived there alone, which I suppose, at that point, was exactly how she felt. I opened the refrigerator to get myself a glass of juice. That was when she said it. "That is not your food." I turned around. She was looking at me with an expression that I can only describe as perfectly calm, as if what she had said was reasonable, as if I should understand and step back. "I beg your pardon," I said. "We're preparing dinner for my family tonight," she said. "I'd appreciate it if you didn't go through what's in there." "I bought the food in this refrigerator," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that later. "I bought all of it 2 hours ago." She made a small gesture with her hand, dismissive, the kind you'd make at a comment that wasn't worth engaging with. Arthur was at the kitchen table. I looked at him. He looked at his phone. I closed the refrigerator. I walked to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed and I stared at the wall for a very long time. That night I called Helen. I told her everything: the chair, the laundry schedule, the pantry, and now this. Helen listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always loved about her. When I finished, she said, "Deb, you need to get out of this situation." Deb. That's me. Deborah Lynn Marsh. Retired teacher, 64 years old, owner of a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, or so I believed. "I can't exactly ask them to leave," I said. "Arthur has no job. They have nowhere to go." "Then you need to talk to someone," Helen said. "A real someone. A lawyer." I said I would think about it. But before I got to the lawyer, something else happened. It was a Tuesday in April. Arthur came to find me in the garden around noon. He had a folder of papers with him, which he held loosely at his side, not quite offering them, not quite hiding them. "Mom," he said, "I want to talk to you about something." We sat on the back porch. He explained that he'd been looking into refinancing options, trying to figure out a financial path forward. He had spoken to someone, a financial advisor, he said, though he was vague about the name, who had suggested that if I granted him a limited power of attorney over my finances, it would make it easier for him to handle certain bills and paperwork on my behalf, just to streamline things while he was living here. He'd be able to help manage the utilities, the property taxes, coordinate with the bank if anything came up. "It's not a big deal," he said. "It just means you don't have to worry about all the administrative stuff. I can handle it for you." I looked at the folder. "Can I read it?" I asked. "Of course," he said. "It's pretty standard language. You know how legal documents are, a lot of words that basically say simple things." I took the folder. He watched me flip through the pages. "Here is what I know about myself. I spent 31 years teaching 12-year-olds to read carefully, to look at a text and ask what it was actually saying, not just what they wanted it to say. But that day, sitting on my own porch with my son watching me, I didn't do that. I saw long paragraphs in small print, and I thought, he's my son, he wouldn't do anything to hurt me. I signed on 3 of the pages he pointed to. I told myself it was fine. It wasn't fine. 3 weeks later, I opened my online banking to check my balance. I had a habit of checking it on the first of the month. The number I saw did not match what should have been there. I sat at my kitchen desk for a long time, very still, the way you go, still when your body understands something before your mind is willing to. $18,500 had been transferred out of my savings account in two separate transactions over the previous 18 days. One for $11,000, one for $7,500, both authorized under the power of attorney document I had signed. I printed the bank statements. My hands were shaking a little, though I noticed that almost from the outside, the way you notice weather. I called Helen. "I need the name of that lawyer," I said. Her name was Catherine Osei, and she had a small office about 4 miles from my house in a building that smelled like printer paper and carpet cleaner. She was in her early 50s, efficient and direct in a way I found immediately reassuring. Not warm exactly, but honest, which at that moment was what I needed. I put the documents on her desk. The power of attorney, the bank statements. She read everything carefully. "Okay," she said after a few minutes. "First thing, the power of attorney you signed. Do you have a copy of the full document?" I had kept one. I gave it to her. She read it, twice. Then she set it down and looked at me. "This is broader than what you were told," she said. "This gives your son authorization to access your checking and savings accounts. It also includes a clause about real property transactions." I heard those words, but it took a moment. "Real property," I said. "Does that mean my house?" "It means he potentially has the authority to act on your behalf in transactions related to your home," she said. "I want to be precise. This is not a deed transfer. You still own the home. But this document gives him more power than a reasonable person would agree to if they fully understood it." I thought about him pointing to the pages, the way he said standard language, the way he watched me not read it. "What can I do?" I asked. "The power of attorney can be revoked," she said, "in writing immediately. We do that today. As for the money, that's a more complicated conversation, but we have options." I want to pause here because I know what some people wonder when they hear stories like this. They wonder, how did you not see it? How did you let it go so far? I've thought about that a lot. I think the honest answer is that when someone is your child, someone you fed and bathed and stayed up with through fevers and drove to school and watched graduate and danced with at their wedding, you carry a kind of trust that doesn't work the same way as trust with a stranger. A stranger I would have questioned, a stranger I would have read every line twice. But Arthur was Arthur. He was 11 years old when his father left. I had held him while he cried. I had convinced him over years that he was going to be okay. How do you read the fine print on someone like that? You just do. That's the lesson. You just do. Because love does not protect you from harm, and the people who can hurt you most are often the ones closest to you. Not because they are evil necessarily. Sometimes because they are desperate, and desperation makes people do things that their better selves would not. I'm not sure I've fully decided what Arthur is. I'm still working on that. Catherine filed the revocation of power of attorney the same day. She sent a certified letter to Arthur as well. The next morning, I came downstairs and handed him a copy. He read it. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Mom, I was going to pay it back." "I know," I said, "but that wasn't your decision to make." Tessa came into the kitchen. She took one look at the paper and her face went flat. She turned around and walked back upstairs without a word. That was a Thursday. By Sunday, they had packed most of their things. I didn't help and I didn't hinder. I sat in my garden and I listened to the sound of boxes being carried through the house that was mine. Catherine pursued the return of the transferred funds through a formal demand letter, and then, when Arthur's initial response was evasive, through small claims and then civil court. This took several months. It was not pleasant. There were conversations through attorneys that felt nothing like the way I had imagined any conversation with my son would ever go. But in the end, I received a settlement. The full $18,500 returned, plus $6,200 in damages and legal fees. The judge was not warm in her assessment of the situation. I didn't feel triumphant when the check arrived. I sat at my kitchen desk, the same place I had been sitting when I found the missing money, and I held the envelope and I thought about the 11-year-old boy who had cried into my shoulder and told me he was scared his dad wasn't coming back. I thought I would do all of it again. Every baseball game, every school play, every tuition payment and wedding contribution and open door. And I also thought, never again, not like this, never like this. Helen came over that evening. I had cooked, A real dinner, roast chicken and potatoes, the kind of meal I hadn't made in months because the kitchen hadn't felt like mine. We ate at my table, in my dining room, and Soot jumped up on the empty chair beside me and settled in like he owned the place, which honestly, he does. "So what now?" Helen asked. "Now I call a financial planner," I said. "A real one. One I find myself, whose name I looked up, whose reviews I read." Helen laughed. "And I'm redoing my will," I said. "And I'm changing my bank account so that I am the only person with access unless I am physically incapacitated." "Good," she said. "And I'm keeping the armchair. The one from the garage." "Arthur brought it back in before he left," I said. "He didn't say anything. He just carried it in and put it back where it was." Helen looked at me. "I don't know what that means," I said honestly. "I don't know if it means anything, but I kept it." She nodded slowly. "You'll figure it out." "Maybe. These things don't resolve cleanly, not in real life." "Arthur called twice since then. I haven't answered." "Not yet. I'm not sure what I would say, and I've learned at 64 that it's better to wait until you know what you want to say than to speak too soon and mean too little. What I know is this: I walk through my house differently now. I notice it more. The way the light comes through the front window in the afternoon, the creak of the third step on the stairs, the particular quiet of a Tuesday evening when Helen and I are watching something on television and the only sound otherwise is Soup breathing and the refrigerator humming. My refrigerator, my house, my life. I spent 31 years teaching children to read carefully, to look at what a text was actually saying. It took me 64 years to apply that lesson to my own story. I'm applying it now. The check sat on my kitchen desk for a while before I opened it. Not because I was afraid of what was inside. I knew what was inside. It was because opening it meant the whole thing was really over, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that yet. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened, not in any grand cosmic sense, just in the plain, practical way a person thinks when they've had time to sit quietly and trace a line back through events. Every consequence in this story had a cause. Every cause had a moment where a choice was made. Tessa said what she said because no one had stopped her before that. Small things had been allowed to become medium things, and medium things had become large ones, and somewhere in that progression, I had confused kindness with permission. That's a distinction worth understanding. Being kind to someone does not give them permission to take over your kitchen, your living room, your savings account. Kindness is something you give. Permission is something you grant intentionally, with full awareness. I had given one, and they had taken the other. Arthur signed his name to documents. He knew I had it read carefully. That's the part I still turn over. He knew. I can see it now in the way he pointed to the signature lines, the way he described the language as standard, the way he watched me flip through pages without actually reading them. He knew, and he made a choice. You can love someone and still hold them accountable for their choices. I'm learning that those two things can exist in the same sentence, and I signed something I didn't read. That's mine to own. 31 years of teaching children to read carefully, to slow down, to ask what a text was actually saying, and I threw all of that out the window the moment it was my own son handing me the pen. I will not make that mistake again, not because I stopped trusting people, but because I understand now that wisdom isn't just knowing things. It's applying what you know, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then. What got me through was not stubbornness exactly. It was something quieter and more persistent. The willingness to keep going after the moment I found that bank balance. To make the phone call to Helen, to sit in Catherine's office, to show up to every meeting and sign every legal document and wade through every month of proceedings without collapsing. That kind of endurance doesn't announce itself. It just shows up the next morning and keeps moving. I am not who I was the day Arthur and Tessa moved in. That woman opened her door without conditions, without records, without fully understanding what she was agreeing to. I don't regret who she was. She loved her son. That was real. But I am this woman now, the one who reads everything, the one who keeps her armchair exactly where she wants it, the one who cooks a real dinner in her own kitchen and listens to the quiet of her own house and knows without any doubt that this is hers. That's enough. That has always been enough.